an instruction guide showing these Hamas terrorists how to abduct, torture, and kidnap Israeli citizens. And so once again, for the people who are whining about being humanitarian, this is savage, sick fucks doing brutal shit to innocent people.
I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjekovic. And we are unapologetically outspoken.
Hey everybody, happy Wednesday. So Stephanie, before we dive into today's topic, I just wanted to talk about something that happened over the weekend. And so this past weekend, my husband took me to Vienna to celebrate my 50th birthday. And while we were there, we happened to come across a large protest with hundreds of people in the middle of the city, which interestingly, as a side note, it was taking place in the same city square where Hitler gave a speech announcing Austria as a part of Nazi Germany back in 1938. So just a little history side note, but I wasn't really sure what the protest was about at first because everything was in German. But once we got closer, I realized it was a protest against the World Health Organization. So
that's a protest I could get behind for sure.
Right. And that's why it piqued my interest. So I saw people holding banners and signs that said stop WHO, meaning stop the World Health Organization. And the WHO equals impending, which I looked that up, and that means WHO equals compulsory vaccination. And then another one that said WHO equals imp dictator. I know I'm pronouncing that wrong. I'm so sorry to German people, but that translates into WHO equals vaccine dictatorship. And then I saw signs the WHO equals global crime. And there was one sign that had names and faces of all the powerful people in the World Health Organization. And it was calling them the criminal cartel. And one guy was holding a sign, and I know this transcription because I had to look it up later, but it said, the WHO pandemic treaty is an attack on Austria's sovereignty and our freedom. And then there was a stage that was set up in the middle of the square, and they had this giant sign on the stage that said, and this is what was really caught my attention. It said, Great Reset Stoppin'. Which translated into stop the Great Reset. So I was trying to take a picture of the sign and translating parts of it when we got back to the hotel. There were phrases on it saying stuff like the Great Reset is a policy of corruption. The Great Reset is false information. And then there was something about the Great Reset and abolishing currency. But there were people standing in front of the sign, so I didn't get all the phrases that were on there. But I also saw people carrying signs with the picture of the needle and the red circle with the line through it. Let's see what else. There was almost everybody that was there was carrying Austrian flags, which I thought was really cool. And then I also saw a couple German flags. And there was a car that had a wooden coffin strapped on top of the car. And the phrase, politisch system across the coffin, which I'm also probably not pronouncing correctly, but I looked up what that meant, and it means political system. So I'm assuming that was a reference to death of the political system. And then so I asked this woman who spoke English what they were protesting, because I wanted to make sure I was correct in my assumptions. And she told me that they were protesting against basically imperialism and in support of their national identity as an individual country and remaining neutral in international health regulations and not wanting to be subject to global health initiatives. And I thought that was pretty fucking cool. And then I looked it up later, and the group was called Out of the WHO. And the coolest part was these were normal people. They weren't trashing the city. They weren't causing trouble. They had a police escort, but the police literally didn't do anything except escort their vehicles to and from the rally. And it was peaceful. It was really awesome to watch. And it wasn't a bunch of crazy fucks out there destroying shit.
Yeah. And it's actually a cause that we all should be protesting. And that's what's so cool about you being over there is you can kind of see the temperature of people in other countries. Because I think a lot of times we just assume oh, Europe, it's everyone's so like liberal and stuff, when really they're against a lot of the same things that we're against. And like the other thing too, with the World Health Organization and the CDC, they haven't been held accountable for anything. It's like we know now for a fact that they had a huge role in spreading misinformation. They threw that term around at everyone else. Meanwhile, they were saying that, the vaccine prevented transmission. They were hiding the real treatments that are safe and that work, like ivermectin. Censoring like all these side effects, yet like nothing ever happened, and nothing really was put in place to prevent this from occurring again in the future, other than Elon Musk, buying Twitter and at least keeping that platform from being completely censored again. But it's nice to see that people are like protesting that. And I mean, that's something we should get behind over here before the next pandemic.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool. So I just wanted to share that with everyone. And then like kind of on the subject of what's happening in the world, like I really wasn't sure if I wanted to bring this up after Monday's episode because it was so fucking dark, right? And, sometimes we try to keep things a little more light and positive, but I read this article on Monday night and like after reading it, like I can't keep my mouth shut because it was so fucking savage and unforgivable. And just a heads up that what I'm about to talk about is really fucking graphic. So if you want to fast forward a few minutes into the episode, like go ahead. But we talked on Monday about, what terrorists do and how this attack on Israel by Hamas is not humanitarian, or it's not like a humanitarian war. Like Stephanie, I'm not sure if you've been seeing coverage of this, but I saw an article in the Epic Times and I've seen shit on TV about how an Israeli forensics team they're recovering the bodies of these Israeli citizens that were kidnapped by Hamas. And they're finding evidence that 80% of the victims are showing signs of torture. And there's a rescuer named Yossi Landau, and he has been with the Israeli Rescue and Recovery. It's an NGO called Zaka for 33 years. And he was talking about all of these atrocities that his team is witnessing. Like we've talked about, there's rapes, mutilations, beheadings. Like he described seeing 2 piles of 10 children and they were all tied at the back and like all these kids were burned to death. He said some of the bodies had been booby trapped to make recovery efforts difficult and more dangerous. He talked about seeing a house with dead burned babies sitting on a fence, and then their parents who had all been slaughtered were like sitting in front of them, presumably that they had put their burned babies on the fence and had made the parents watch and then slaughtered them after the fact. And like, I hadn't seen this before we did our Monday episode, but Israeli President Isaac Herzog did an interview with CNN on Sunday where he was showing this pamphlet that was recovered from the body of one of the terrorists who was killed. And the pamphlet was basically an instruction guide showing these Hamas like terrorists how to abduct, torture, and kidnap Israeli citizens. And so once again, for like the people who are whining about being humanitarian, like this is savage, sick fucks doing brutal shit to innocent people.
Yeah. And as hard as it is to talk about these things, I think it is important because what's happening here in America, especially like when you look on TikTok, things that are being talked about on college campuses, there are a lot of reports of like fake news. So like people are, I mean, this is my whole TikTok feed. People are saying that like everything you just said is completely made up by Israel in order to have an excuse to attack the Palestinians. And like, I remember seeing that when I was on vacation, I got on TikTok for like a minute and I had to like get off right away because it was just like ridiculous. But I started like thinking, oh, well, maybe this is misinformation. Maybe they are making it up, and it starts to like mess with your mind. But honestly, like, I think it was sort of like a mental defense mechanism because what you said is so brutal. It's like almost hard to believe it or to think that like human beings are capable of that. But because there's like all of these reports of propaganda on both sides, Israel ended up releasing a lot of the photos and videos of these just horrible atrocities happening. And if that's not enough proof, like anyone can just go on YouTube or social media and look at what Hamas is posting. Like they are posting this stuff. They're taking credit for it. They're laughing about it. And if it was Israeli propaganda, then like why would Hamas be posting that and like laughing about it, you know?
Yeah, that's one of the things. I don't know if you listened to Ben Shapiro. I think it was last week or earlier this week, and he was saying like that's the difference, like that this is what's so much more extreme than Nazi Germany, because at least the Nazis tried to hide what they were doing, whereas Hamas is literally posting photos and videos of the shit that they're doing.
Oh yeah, it's absolutely heartbreaking. And you know, with so many people spreading hate about Israel and like Jewish people right now, I think that it's important to remember who the aggressors were. Like Hamas attacked innocent civilians, you know, like that is not okay under any circumstance. Um, I watched a video on, I think it was Fox News, one of the mothers of one of the Israeli hostages that was taken from the music festival. She said that most of his friends that were with him were brutally murdered. The only reason she knows that her son was taken hostage was because a witness that survived, and the only reason he survived was because there were like dead bodies literally on top of him, of his friends. Um, and this witness said that they took her son, and at the time that they took him, his arm was blown off because they were throwing grenades and then using guns to go into the shelter where they were hiding. And listening to this mother, knowing that at this point her son is most likely dead because of his injuries, you know, if they hadn't, you know, already killed him from something else. It's just like it's hard to listen to that and then to see people like standing up for it, standing up for, you know, what Hamas is doing. It's just like so insane to me that this is happening. And I feel the same way for like any of the innocent Palestinian civilians that are now going to be in the crosshairs of this brutal war. It's awful. But when terrorists attack, you can't just stand down and do nothing. Like you have to take action. And I, you know, I think there's a lot of people that are just not looking at that angle of it. Another story that's been going around is Hamas taking an elderly woman and videotaping her horrible murder and posting it on her Facebook page so that all of her friends and family could watch those horrible moments of her death. Like, it's so dark and horrific that anyone could do these kinds of things. And I don't get how there's so many people that hear that and it's just like they're totally not bothered by it. And I think, you know, I know I talked about this on Monday, but what's so alarming is like in the matter of a few days, I went from thinking that something like the Holocaust would never happen again to like quite literally worrying that it's beginning to happen all over again. And the fact that so many Americans like just don't see that and don't care and are siding with terrorists is mind blowing.
Yeah, it completely is. And it's fucking frightening. But I have to say that like, I really respect what Israel's doing because they're not hiding behind words. They're not trying to make shit sound nice. They are dealing with the realities of war. They're not giving speeches about tolerance and like word salad non-answers like the Biden administration does with everything. Like Israel straight up has the fuck around and find out attitude that we used to have in America. And I support that 100% because it's about protecting the citizens of Israel and avenging. And that's what we're lacking in the United States right now. Like Israel has fucking balls and like we don't. I'm sorry, but we don't. Because even though Biden is supporting Israel and he's actually being very outspoken about that, he's also focused, which I understand, on like creating humanitarian corridors for people to evacuate from Gaza. And I agree that innocent Palestinian civilians should not be caught in the middle of this either. But Biden is talking about, negotiating settlements with Israel and Palestine. And I think that's fucking insane right now. And apparently so does Israel, because they're saying, fuck that. No. On Sunday, the Israeli ambassador to the US, Michael Herzog, said that Israel forces are amassing troops for a ground operation to destroy Hamas, because they're at war and they're going to fight. And their goal is not to occupy Gaza or reoccupy Gaza. They don't give a fuck about that. They want to eliminate Hamas. And he stated, quote, "We are determined to destroy the Hamas war machine so they cannot threaten us again. We do not want to be in the game where every few years they launch a war against us or provoke us. That's over, and we're determined to destroy the war machine." And we talked about this on Monday. There are very likely going to be a shit ton of civilian casualties because Hamas doesn't care about the Palestinian people. Even Biden in his speech, one of his several speeches, recognized that, Hamas is a bunch of cowards. They're hiding behind their civilians. They place their headquarters in civilian areas. But again, he's pushing for these negotiating settlements. And I'm kind of going to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole here, but stick with me because I think this is all related. So who else is pushing for settlements between Palestine and Israel? China. In fact, the CCP's top diplomat gave a statement saying that the United States should, quote, "play a constructive and responsible role pushing the conflict back on track for a political settlement as soon as possible," end quote. And, Biden's head is so far up China's ass that no wonder that's what he's tiptoeing around. He's trying to maintain these ties with Israel, but pushing this, whole treaty thing. And isn't it ironic that China, which is literally one of the most brutal governments in the world, is urging Israel to stop its military action against Gaza and saying that Israel has gone beyond self-defense? Like, that's laughable.
Meanwhile, are they going to stop from going into Taiwan? Probably not.
Exactly. And you know who China didn't condemn? They didn't condemn Hamas attacks on Israel. And the CCP has refrained from denouncing Hamas at all. And in fact, when they tiptoe around, the logistics of this issue, they don't even specifically reference Hamas at all. But then really, is that surprising? No. There was an Epoch Times article I read. This guy, Gordon Chang, he's the author of The Coming Collapse of China and China is Going to War. And he stated in this interview, he said, quote, "We have to look at China's relationship with Iran because Iran has often been a proxy for Beijing. And of course, Hamas is a proxy of Iran. So really what we've got here is China fueling these brutal attacks and this invasion of Israel. I'm sure Chinese weapons will show up on the battlefield. And of course, it's Chinese money that has permitted this," end quote. So here's what I'm trying to tie together and try to make sense of what I believe is possibly happening here, because I just can't stop thinking about what a fucking mess the world has been in. And it's primarily because of how fucked up the United States has become. And when did the United States get completely overtly fucked up to the rest of the world? When Biden took office. And so I read this very interesting op-ed in the Washington Examiner yesterday by this woman named Elizabeth Stauffer. And it caught my attention because the article was titled, "The World is on Fire and Joe Biden is the Arsonist." So I'm like, oh, this sounds that. Yeah, it was fantastic. And it was a great article. And just in summary, like, she hit the nail on the head because she basically wrote that it was America's humiliating withdrawal from Afghanistan that basically shook the balance of power across the globe in a way that was so profound and irrevocable, because Biden displayed such massive weakness and abdication of duty as the leader of the free world that it created a power vacuum. And I think she's totally right. It's undeniable that all this crazy shit going on in the world has occurred because the Biden administration is so corrupt and so inept. And once we fucked up that withdrawal from Afghanistan, it showed the world that the US is a fucking clown show. It opened the doors for all of these other world leaders to try to show their power. Over the past 6 months or so, you have all this evidence surfacing of the Biden family embezzling millions of dollars of funds through Ukraine, their shady business dealings with China, while we're allowing China to buy up farmland, send spy balloons across the country. For 2 years, we've sent astronomical amounts of money to Ukraine. which, by the way, like Zelensky is basically demanding, which is a whole other topic, because since when would an American president allow another nation to make demands of the United States? Like Trump never would have allowed that. Any strong leader would never have allowed that. But that is what's happening in the United States. And not a day goes by that Biden doesn't embarrass this country on national TV with his dementia that his administration pretends doesn't exist. And we wonder why the world is in chaos. And like Biden is scheduled to be in Tel Aviv today to meet with Netanyahu. And according to the White House National Security Council, his agenda is to reaffirm, the United States support for Israel's right to defend itself and go after Hamas. But he's also there to apparently gather info on the hostages in order to, quote, develop policy options, whatever the fuck that means. He's scheduled afterwards to go to Jordan. So in Jordan, he's supposed to be meeting with King Abdullah from Jordan, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, and then Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. And he's meeting with these three to discuss humanitarian efforts and providing safe passage out of Gaza into Egypt through something called the Rafah crossing. And apparently U.S. officials have been in talks with Egypt about this, and they're asking Egypt to open this crossing to allow foreign nationals in Gaza to enter Egypt in exchange for supplying humanitarian aid to Palestinian civilians that are like congregated in this crossing. But hearing that just made me wonder, like, what's really going on? I mean, Biden can barely fucking stay awake. Like, the guy can't keep his eyes open when he's giving a press conference. Most of the time, he has no fucking clue where he even is. He can't get through a meeting with a foreign leader or dignitary without doing or saying something offensive. You've got polls showing left and right that people believe he's unfit for office. And yet we're supposed to believe that he's capable of being this strong, effective presence that's going to have an impact on foreign policy. And maybe what I'm about to say, is out there because of my conspiracy theory brain, but I can't help but thinking, like, what if this is all part of like the Cobb Mafia power play? And what if the U.S. had a hand in creating this conflict with Hamas with the purpose of getting people to start supporting Biden again, because they're going to turn him into this great uniter that stops the Israel-Palestine conflict? And like, maybe that's crazy talk, but I wouldn't put it past this administration. Like, do you think I'm totally out of left field with this?
Oh, no. My conspiracy brain is all over this. I was thinking not so much that this could be to get everyone to like Biden, but that this would more be like their power play to get us under one world order, like uniting against like the bad people in the world. And like, so that's how they're going to get the Americans and everyone else to be okay with this like global, government type thing. And like the conspiracy going around TikTok is that this is all planned. And this way, like if there is war and like terrorist acts and all these other things going on, then we could go under martial law. And if we go under martial law, there's no election, which is exactly the move that Zelensky played in Ukraine. So that's what a lot of people are talking about. And I could see that. Like, I absolutely think that they will do anything. Yeah.
Yeah. You and I have talked about that before. Like, we would not put that past this administration as the elections get closer to find a reason to put us under martial law and not have an election.
Right. And everyone called it about him pulling out of Afghanistan and that just embarrassing disaster, and how, this would embolden all of our enemies. And it's playing out just like everyone anticipated. So I don't know. I also think that the people who are really in charge, whoever they are, they get very rich off of war. That's why there's been ongoing wars my entire life. So I think that they absolutely want this to continue raging. But on the flip side, there's so many people that are making the comment, like, if you don't know the history behind Palestine and Israel, then blah, blah, blah. So I went and looked at the history and I educated myself. And guess what? There has been five separate occasions where a peace settlement was brought to the table and Israel was fine with it. They were signing off on it and Palestine said no. 5 different times where they were, wanting to just settle this. When Bill Clinton was president, he even said that during the settlement at that time, they were in negotiations for 14 days. And he said the only word that was spoken by the Palestinians in charge was no, 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 no. They agreed to nothing in 14 days. So it wouldn't be any different this time. Like if they did try to settle this, why would we think it's going to be any different? Like this is something that has been raging on for a long time and I think isn't going to settle anytime soon. And so, my concern is it is going to trigger a much bigger conflict, especially with them going into Gaza. You can have like Hezbollah and them attacking from the other side. And then next thing you know, it's Iran and then America's involved. And then there we are, we're World War III and we're under martial law and there's no election. So it's just a shit show. I don't think any of this would have happened. Like you said, Tara, if Trump was in charge, but we have a weak fucking president and can't even keep his eyes open during a fucking 60 minutes interview. And so it's not looking good no matter what way you look at it. But I don't think that giving the Palestinians land and settling is actually going to settle anything because they've tried that on 5 separate occasions. So all of the people that are complaining that we don't know the history and you need to educate yourself, you need to go educate yourself and look at who's the one that's been trying to make these deals and who are the people that are refusing to make a deal. And I mean, I'm sorry, like there's no easy way out of this. So basically we're fucked is my opinion on the whole thing. So yeah, more depressing, negative talk.
But it's reality. Like we can't ignore like what the fuck is going on and why it's happening.
Well, yeah. And it's like, elections have consequences. Everyone that voted for Biden, like this is what you voted for. We all knew it was going to happen.
Yeah. And we're all fucked because of it.
Yeah. You have a weak leader. That's what happens. Like say what you want about Trump. The world would not fuck with him. They feared him. And that is what you need in a leader, So anyhow, shifting topics, because I feel like we've got to just touch real quick on the fact that we still don't have a speaker. So Steve Scalise was nominated, but then he didn't get the votes. They, enough Republicans said they wouldn't vote for him. So he dropped out. So then Jim Jordan was nominated in his place. And here's the thing, like there's such a slim majority. They can't afford to lose. I think it's more than 4 votes. And we know what's going to happen with the Democrats. They're going to all band together and vote for Hakeem Jeffries, the Democrat. So the Republicans need to get their shit together because without a speaker, the House is not able to pass any bills or approve like the White House request for emergency aid, which would include potential aid for like Israel and like all this stuff going on with Hamas. And so they did kind of like one of those pre-votes just to see who all would vote for Jim Jordan. And there were still, I think 10 as of Monday night that were not going to vote for him. So again, like if just 5 Republicans vote against him, then that could mean a Democrat in the speaker position. So it's Tuesday afternoon as we're recording this. So we'll have to update you on Friday's episode. They're going to do another vote today and we'll see. I mean, if there's 5 Republicans not on board with him, then we're screwed. So we'll update everyone on Friday with what the final result is. What do you think is going to happen, Tara?
I think Republicans can't get their shit together and they're going to fuck the country. That's what I think.
Oh God, I hope not. But I think you're probably right. I hope that when push comes to shove, they'll realize like this would be better than a Democrat, but I don't know. We'll see. Which Jim Jordan, by the way, is against funding for Ukraine. So that's what is causing so many Republicans to kind of like have an issue with him. So, yeah. All right. Well, another depressing episode, but I mean, this is what's really happening in the world. And like I said, there's so much misinformation going around and just bullshit. that you need to educate yourself on this. Don't take our word for it. Go and look it up. Like, this stuff is, you can find all of these agreements that were proposed over the last century between Israel and Palestine. Just don't take anyone's word for it online. Like, do your own research, because man, there is so much like brainwashing happening right now, and it's getting us in a really interesting situation. So yeah.
I know we're about to go, but I just, like you mentioned this earlier, I've been reading so many articles about what's happening in the colleges, the protests in the colleges, like in support of Hamas and Palestine. And like, these kids are so fucking indoctrinated by our school system. Like, if you have high school, elementary, college age kids, like, educate your fucking kids on what the actual truth is, because it's really frightening to watch what these schools are teaching our children.
I think this could be the fall of like the Ivy League schools, because I just heard an interview about that the other day where parents are like, we're not going to spend $100,000 a year sending our kids to Harvard, Yale, Berkeley, like all of the Ivy League schools that were once, looked at as like the greatest school to go to, are the ones where you're seeing a lot of these protests in support for Hamas. And it's just, it's crazy. But luckily there are a lot of businesses and very important people that are like posting that they're looking at the names of these student organizations and they're blocking them. They're not going to hire these people when they graduate from Harvard. So I think that's good. I think more businesses need to start standing up and doing that. All right. Well, thank you for tuning in to this very heavy episode. We'll keep you posted and see you back here Friday. If you're sick of all the crazy shit going on in our country and you want to express your support and patriotism for the show, head on over to our Etsy store at UO Patriot Chicks and check out our new stickers. The link can also be found on our website. If you love the show and you want exclusive episodes, support the podcast and join the conversation by becoming a member of our Patreon community. We'll be posting weekly member-only podcast episodes and content that isn't available on the weekly podcast. Every Patreon member will also get a free Unapologetically Outspoken sticker and updates about our new sticker release before they're made public. And be sure to follow us on TikTok at Unapologetically Outspoken. And if you haven't done so already, please rate and review the podcast. The more you support us, the more people we can reach. So help us spread the word.